Picture yourself in Berlin, November 1923. You step into a small neighborhood bakery, the kind that once sold warm bread to middle-class families every morning. Behind the counter, the chalkboard lists today's price, 200 billion marks for one loaf of bread. Not 200, not 200,000. 200 billion. The woman in front of you doesn't reach for her purse. She drags in a wheelbarrow, overflowing with paper money, not to stock up on groceries, but just to afford milk. As you wait your turn, time passes, 12 minutes. When you finally reach the counter, the baker sighs, wipes the board clean, and writes a new number, 250 billion marks. While you stood in line, the currency lost 30% of its value. This isn't dystopian fiction. This was the Weimar Republic, and it wasn't unique. Fast forward through history, and the scenes repeat with chilling precision. Venezuela, 2018, a carton of eggs cost 7 million bolivars. Zimbabwe, 2008, a single bus ticket requires a $100 trillion banknote. Lebanon, 2023, the national currency loses 98% of its value in just 4 years, wiping out life savings and turning doctors, engineers, and professionals into the working poor almost overnight. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Currency collapse in a rare anomaly, it's the historical norm. The average lifespan of a fiat currency is 27 years. The modern dollar system has existed since 1971. Do the math. So, the real question ain't whether currencies fail. They do. The question that actually matters is this: when money stops working, what still holds value? To answer that, I went through a century of economic autopsies. Not theories, not forecasts, real collapses. Weimar Germany, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Lebanon, same disease, different decades. When you strip away politics and excuses, currency failure follows a remarkably consistent pattern. Stage 1. Governments spend more than they collect. Stage 2. They print money to fill the gap. Stage 3. Purchasing power erodes. Stage 4. People flee to alternatives. Stage 5. Complete monetary collapse. Every single time. Weimar Germany went from 320 marks per dollar in mid-1922 to 4.2 trillion marks per dollar by November 1923. That's a 98% loss in 18 months. Venezuela's bolivar fell from 10 per dollar to over 1 million per dollar within a decade. Lebanon's pound collapsed from 1,500 per dollar to nearly 89,000 in just 4 years. Different countries, same stages, same outcome. When the currency dies, paper promises die with it, but not everything disappears. The first asset that consistently survives is also the most misunderstood: precious metals. Gold and silver. Assets that governments cannot print and central banks cannot dilute at will. During the Weimar collapse, holding paper marks meant total annihilation. 100% loss. Holding gold meant something very different. An ounce of gold bought the same basket of goods before the collapse, during the collapse, and after the collapse. The currency changed, gold didn't. Zimbabwe tells the same story. When $100 trillion notes flooded the economy, gold holders preserved their purchasing power. Venezuela, again, same result. While the bolivar evaporated, gold retained value. Even today, in countries experiencing rapid inflation, citizens instinctively move toward metals. In Turkey, late 2024 data shows gold deposit accounts doubling in a single quarter as people flee currency debasement. Critics often say gold does nothing. That's exactly the point. Gold doesn't need earnings. It doesn't require dividends. Its sole job is to not be debased. When fiat supply explodes, each unit buys less. Gold's supply doesn't expand on command, so its relative value rises by default. History confirms this repeatedly. During the 1970s stagflation, gold initially fell, then surged over 400%. After the 2008 crisis, it climbed more than 160% in under 3 years. Precious metals aren't speculation. They're insurance. You don't hold them to get rich. You hold them so that, when everything else burns, your purchasing power survives. And this is where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The second asset that survives currency collapse is far less romantic than gold, but just as powerful: foreign hard currencies. When your domestic money starts dying, the fastest escape route isn't theory or ideology. It's holding someone else's stable money. Picture Beirut, October 2019. You're a nurse. You've worked for more than a decade, saving carefully. Your bank account shows the equivalent of $50,000, all denominated in Lebanese pounds. The currency has been pegged for 22 years, stable, predictable, safe. Then the peg snaps. Quietly at first, the black market rate moves to £1,600 per dollar. Now look at your colleague. Another nurse, same income, same savings goal. She didn't trust the system. She kept her money in physical US dollars, outside the banking system. When the collapse finished, she still had 100% of her purchasing power. Not because the dollar was perfect. It could have been Swiss francs or euros. The difference was simple. She held a currency that wasn't collapsing. This isn't a one-off story. Zimbabwe's economy dollarized itself long before the government admitted defeat. People abandoned the local currency entirely and transacted in US dollars. Ecuador did the same in 2000. El Salvador followed in 2001. Panama has used the dollar since 1904. Venezuela today uses dollars for major purchases, despite the bolivar technically remaining legal tender. Argentina prices property in dollars, not pesos. Cambodia's ATM is dispensed dollars, not real. This behavior, in political, it's biological. Survival. When domestic money fails, rational people switch to something that works. Governments can pass laws. People vote with their wallets. The lesson is blunt. Access to foreign currency during a collapse is total protection. The person holding pounds in Lebanon lost nearly everything. The person holding dollars lost nothing. That's not market volatility. That's the difference between financial survival and annihilation. The third surviving asset confuses almost everyone: productive equities, stocks, ownership in real companies with real assets. This sounds insane at first, because collapsing economies feel incompatible with rising markets. Yet history shows the opposite. Venezuela's stock market surged over 3,400% in a single year. In early 2026, the Caracas exchange jumped thousands of points in days. Individual stocks doubled and tripled almost overnight. This wasn't prosperity. It was arithmetic. A stock isn't a piece of paper. It's ownership of factories, equipment, inventory, land, productive capacity. When a currency collapses, the nominal price of everything rises because the unit measuring value is failing. If a company is worth $100 million in real assets and the exchange rate triples, its stock price must triple in local currency thus to stay equal. But here's the distinction that separates survivors from victims. Not all stocks are equal. Companies earning revenue only in the collapsing currency suffer in real terms even if their stock prices rise. Their costs explode, their profits evaporate. But companies with foreign or export revenues behave very differently. An exporter paid in dollars but paying local wages in a devalued currency becomes more profitable during collapse. Revenues stay stable, costs fall in real terms. Shareholders benefit. Research across Latin America in the 1980s, Mexico in 1994, and Asia in 1998 confirms this pattern repeatedly. Firms with international revenue streams survived. Domestic-only firms burned. Stocks don't fail because economies collapse. They fail because the currency measuring them collapses. When ownership is tied to real assets and external revenue, equities become an inflation hedge rather than a casualty. Then there are assets that don't store value long-term, but become vital when systems freeze: consumables and barter goods. When formal money fails entirely, exchange doesn't stop. It changes form. Post-World War II Germany saw cigarettes become money. Not ideology, practicality. They were standardized, divisible, portable, non-perishable, and widely accepted. Black markets ran 24 hours a day trading cigarettes for food, transport, and documents. When Red Cross shipments flooded camps with cigarettes, prices rose. Inflation, same mechanism, different medium. Venezuela repeated this pattern. Fishermen traded fish for flour. Medicine, fuel, batteries, soap, clean water, basic tools, anything with immediate utility became valuable. But there's a limit. Consumables are consumed. You can't store wealth in aspirin forever. They're tactical, not strategic. Which brings us to land, agricultural land. The immobile asset that produces the one thing humans cannot live without, calories. During the Great Depression, farmers survived in ways urban workers couldn't. Food production doesn't care about exchange rates. But land has vulnerabilities. It's a liquid. It can't be moved. Governments know exactly where it is and can tax or seize it. Zimbabwe's land seizures destroyed output and erased value almost overnight. Agricultural land preserves fundamental utility, but it carries political risk that portable assets don't. And now, just as important as what survives is understanding what goes to zero. Because some assets don't decline slowly, they are obliterated. At the top of that list sits fixed income securities denominated in the collapsing currency. Government bonds, treasury notes, savings certificates, anything where you are a creditor to a state that can't stop printing money. On paper, these assets look safe. Predictable interest, guaranteed repayment. In reality, they are promises written in disappearing ink. Weimar Germany provides the cleanest example. Citizens who lent money to the government through bonds were repaid exactly as promised on time and in full. The problem was the marks used to repay them were worthless. Interest payments couldn't buy bread, principal couldn't buy coal. Bond holders didn't just underperform, they were completely wiped out. If the currency collapses, the claim collapses with it. Right alongside bonds sit domestic savings accounts held inside failing banking systems. This is the most common wealth destruction mechanism in modern collapses because it targets people who did everything right. They worked, they saved, they trusted institutions. Lebanon again makes the lesson unavoidable. This isn't theft in the traditional sense. It's arithmetic. Banks can't create purchasing power. They can only promise currency. When the currency fails, the promise becomes meaningless. And this is why being a creditor to a failing state or banking system is historically the fastest route to total wealth destruction. Once you understand that, warning signs become impossible to ignore. Currency collapsed doesn't arrive unannounced. It broadcasts itself loudly to anyone who knows the signals. Look at cash shortages and withdrawal limits. When people can't access their own money, confidence evaporates. Iraq has experienced severe liquidity constraints, with banking restrictions shrinking usable money supply and driving currency smuggling across borders. That behavior doesn't happen in stable systems. Look at currency substitution. When citizens abandon local money for foreign alternatives, the collapse has already begun. Turkey's surge in gold holdings isn't speculation, it's population-level risk management. Lebanon's dollarization happened long before the system officially failed. Then there's debt expansion. When interest payments consume a growing share of government budgets, the endgame narrows. Historically, States choose inflation over default because it's politically easier. The result is the same for savers, which brings us to the largest system in the room. The United States, nearly $40 trillion in debt. A debt-to-GDP ratio moving higher. Interest payments now rival or exceed core government spending categories. Meanwhile, the dollar's share of global reserves has declined steadily from its post-war peak. This doesn't mean imminent collapse. It does mean the pattern exists. Britain followed the same trajectory. In 1913, sterling was the world's reserve currency. Within decades, Britain became a net debtor, and the dollar replaced it. Reserve currency status, impermanent. No currency has escaped that cycle. Here's the uncomfortable truth history keeps repeating. Fiat currency collapse is not a question of morality or competence. It's a question of math. When liabilities grow faster than productive capacity, debasement becomes inevitable. That's why panic is the wrong response. People who panic sell real assets for collapsing currency lock in losses. People who prepare rationally spread risk across different forms of value that respond differently to systemic failure. A portfolio concentrated in one country, one currency, or one asset class carries hidden fragility. A portfolio diversified across stores of value, mediums of exchange, and productive assets has resilience. Consumables offer short-term exchange value when systems freeze. Agricultural land produces food when nothing else matters. None of these are perfect, each has vulnerabilities. But together, they form something history consistently rewards: redundancy. Currency collapse doesn't announce itself with sirens. It creeps in through policy decisions, debt accumulation, and quiet erosion of trust. By the time the bakery price changes while you're standing in line, the outcome is already sealed. Understanding this isn't pessimism, it's literacy. And history has been remarkably generous in showing us exactly how the story ends for those who ignore the pattern. When you strip away the emotion, the politics, and the headlines, what's left is a simple conclusion: history keeps forcing on us, money is a tool, not a guarantee. When the tool breaks, only value that exists outside the tool survives. Every collapse, from Weimar to Venezuela, delivers the same verdict. 99% of all currencies that have ever existed no longer exist. They didn't fade slowly, they ended. Some were replaced. Some were abandoned. Some died quietly. Others collapsed violently, but none were permanent. The average lifespan remains brutally consistent, about 27 years. This isn't theory, it's recorded fact. The mistake people make in trusting money, it's trusting only money. When currencies fail, survival doesn't belong to the smartest economist or the loudest predictor. It belongs to those who are diversified across different forms of value before the failure became obvious. That's the part most people miss. By the time collapse feels real, it's already too late to reposition safely. History shows 5 asset categories that repeatedly preserved value when monetary systems failed. First, precious metals. Gold and silver have no counterparty risk, no promise, no liability. They don't depend on governments staying disciplined or banks remaining solvent, they simply exist. Across centuries, cultures, and collapses, they retained purchasing power when paper didn't. Second, foreign hard currencies, not because they're perfect, but because collapse is usually local before it's global. Holding currency issued outside the failing system gives you optionality. It lets you exit when domestic money becomes a trap rather than a medium of exchange. Third, productive equities with international revenue streams. Ownership matters. Real businesses don't disappear when currencies fail. Factories still produce. Assets still exist. Companies earning foreign revenue often improve profitability during devaluation. But this only works when revenue entrapped inside the collapsing system. Fourth, consumables and barter goods. These aren't wealth. They're liquidity when money stops functioning. Fuel, medicine, food, basic tools items with immediate utility become temporary currencies during acute crisis phases. They don't store value long term, but they buy time when systems freeze. Fifth, agricultural land, the ultimate real asset. Land that produces food holds intrinsic value regardless of monetary conditions. Calories don't care about exchange rates. But land carries political risk, taxation risk, and illiquidity. It's powerful, but not invulnerable. Then there are the assets history consistently destroys. Fixed income securities denominated in failing currencies don't just underperform, they collapse. You are lending value and being repaid in something that no longer represents value. Domestic savings accounts inside insolvent banking systems follow the same fate. The balance remains, the purchasing power vanishes. This is why understanding currency collapse isn't about fear. It's about structure. Systems fail when incentives and math collide. Governments rarely choose collapse. They drift into it because every alternative feels worse in the short term. The warning signs are always there: rising debt, persistent deficits, monetary expansion disconnected from productivity, loss of trust, capital controls, currency substitution. These aren't coincidences, they're symptoms. Some countries are already deep into the process. Others are earlier along the curve. No nation is exempt forever. Reserve currency status slows the cycle, but it doesn't cancel it. History has never granted permanent exemptions. The correct response isn't panic or extremism, it's positioning. Diversification across assets that fail differently under stress is the only proven defense. Not everything will survive, but not everything needs to. The goal isn't perfection, it's resilience. A portfolio entirely in domestic currency is fragile. A portfolio entirely in domestic bonds is terminally exposed. A portfolio that includes stores of value, productive assets, and jurisdictional diversity has a fighting chance under almost any scenario. Currency collapse doesn't announce itself with headlines. It reveals itself quietly through erosion, distortion, and normalization of instability. By the time bread costs billions, the decision window is long gone. History has already written the playbook. It has shown us what survives, what fails, and why. The only variable left is whether you choose to learn from those autopsies or become the next case study standing in line, watching the price change while you wait.